stories to give you tingles. So I'll set that to the side. I'm going to start off with Little Red Riding Hood, and then I'll just read a couple of random selections from the stories in this treasury. It's got about like 500 or 600 pages, so there's a lot of content here. But I'll start with a familiar one, something that's familiar to most American families at least, which is Little Red Riding Hood. So I'll start with that one. Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a dear little girl who was loved by everyone who looked at her, but most of all by her grandmother, and there was nothing that she would not have given to the child. Once she gave her a little cap of red velvet, which suited her so well that she would never wear anything else, so she was always called Little Red Riding Hood. One day her mother said to her, "Come, Little Red Riding Hood, here's a piece of cake and a bottle of wine. Take them to your grandmother. She is ill and weak, and they will do her good. Set out before it gets hot, and when you are going, walk nicely and quietly, and do not run off the path, or you may fall and break the bottle, and then your grandmother will get nothing. And when you go into her room, don't forget to say good morning, and don't peep into every corner before you do it." "I will take great care," said Little Red Riding Hood to her mother, and gave her hand on it. The grandmother lived out in the wood, half a league from the village, and just as Little Red Riding Hood entered the wood, a wolf met her. Red Riding Hood did not know what a wicked creature he was, and was not at all afraid of him. "Good day, Little Red Riding Hood," said the wolf. "Thank you kindly, wolf. Whither away so early, Little Red Riding Hood?" "To my grandmother's." "What have you got in your apron?" "Cake and wine. Yesterday was baking day, so poor sick grandmother is to have something good to make her stronger." "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" "A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees. The nut trees are just below." "You surely must know it," replied Little Red Riding Hood. The wolf thought to himself, "What a tender young creature, what a nice plump mouthful. She will be better to eat than the old woman. I must act craftily so as to catch both." So he walked for a short time by the side of Little Red Riding Hood, and then he said, "See, Little Red Riding Hood, how pretty the flowers are about here. Why do you not look round? I believe, too, that you do not hear how sweetly the little birds are singing. You walk gravely along as if you were going to school, while everything else out here in the wood is merry." Little Red Riding Hood raised her eyes, and when she saw the sunbeams dancing here and there through the trees, and pretty flowers growing everywhere, she thought, "Suppose I take grandmother a fresh nosegay, that would please her too. It is so early in the day that I shall still get there in good time." And so she ran from the path into the wood to look for flowers. And whenever she had picked one, she fancied that she saw a still prettier one farther on, and ran after it, and so got deeper and deeper into the wood. Meanwhile the wolf ran straight to the grandmother's house and knocked at the door. "Who is there?" "Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf. "She is bringing cake and wine. Open the door." "Lift the latch," called out the grandmother. "I am too weak and cannot get up." The wolf lifted the latch. The door flew open, and without saying a word, he went She was surprised to find the cottage door standing open, and when she went into the room, she had such a strange feeling that she said to herself, "Oh dear, how uneasy I feel today, and at other times I like being with grandmother so much." She called out, "Good morning," but received no answer, so she went to the bed and drew back the curtains. There lay her grandmother with her cap pulled far over her face and looking very strange. "Oh, grandmother," she said, "what big ears you have." "The better to hear you with, my child," was the reply. "But grandmother, what big eyes you have," she said. "The better to see you with, my dear." "But grandmother, what large hands you have." "The better to hug you with." "Oh, but grandmother, what a terrible big mouth you have." "The better to eat you with." And scarcely had the wolf said this, than with one bound he was out of bed and swallowed up Red Riding Hood. When the wolf had appeased his appetite, he lay down again in the bed, fell asleep, and began to snore very loud. The huntsman was just passing the house, and thought to himself, "How the old woman is snoring! I must just see if she wants anything." So he went into the room, and when he came to the bed, he saw that the wolf was lying in it. "Do I find thee here, thou old sinner?" said he. "I have long sought thee." Then, just as he was going to fire at him, it occurred to him that the wolf might have devoured the grandmother, and that she might still be saved, so he did not fire, but took a pair of scissors and began to cut open the stomach of the sleeping wolf. When he had made 2 snips, he saw the little Red Riding Hood shining, and then he made 2 snips more, and the little girl sprang out, crying. "Ah, how frightened I have been, how dark it was inside the wolf." And after that, the aged grandmother came out alive also, but scarcely able to breathe. Red Riding Hood, however, quickly fetched giant great stones with which they filled the wolf's body, and when he awoke, he wanted to run away. But the stones were so heavy that he fell down at once and fell dead. Then all 3 were delighted. The huntsman drew off the wolf's skin and went home with it. The grandmother ate the cake and drank the wine which Red Riding Hood had brought, and revived. But Red Riding Hood thought to herself, "As long as I live, I will never by myself leave the path to run into the woods, when my mother has forbidden me to do so." It is also related that once when Red Riding Hood was again taking cakes to the old grandmother, another wolf spoke to her and tried to entice her from the path. Red Riding Hood, however, was on her guard, and went straight forward on her way, and told her grandmother that she had met the wolf, and that he had said good morning to her, but with such a wicked look in his eyes, that if they had not been on the public road, she was certain he would have eaten her up. "Well," said the grandmother, "we will shut the door, that he may not come in." Soon afterwards the wolf knocked and cried, "Open the door, grandmother. I am Little Red Riding Hood, and I am fetching you some cakes." But they did not speak or open the door, so the graybeard stole twice or thrice around the house, and at last jumped on the roof, intending to wait until Red Riding Hood went home in the evening, and then to steal after her and devour her in the darkness. But the grandmother saw what was in his thoughts. In front of the house was a great stone trough, so she said to the child, "Take the pail, Red Riding Hood. I made some sausages yesterday, so carry the water in which I boiled them to the trough." Red Riding Hood carried until the great trough was quite full. Then the smell of the sausages reached the wolf, and he sniffed and peeped down, and at last stretched out his neck so far that he could no longer keep his footing, and began to slip, and slipped down from the roof straight into the great trough, and was drowned. But Red Riding Hood went joyously home, and never did anything to harm anyone. Rumpelstiltskin should be a good second one. We'll jump to that one on page 221. Give me 1 second. Okay, Rumpelstiltskin. Once there was a miller who was poor, but who had a beautiful daughter. Now it happened that he had to go and speak to the king, and in order to make himself appear important, he said to him, "I have a daughter who can spin straw into gold." The king said to the miller, "That is an art which pleases me well. If your daughter is as clever as you say, bring her tomorrow to my palace, and I will try what she can do." And when the girl was brought to him, he took her into a room which was quite full of straw, and gave her a spinning wheel and a reel, and said, "Now set to work. And if by tomorrow morning early you have not spun the straw into gold during the night, you must die." Thereupon he himself locked up the room and left her in it alone. So there sat the poor miller's daughter, and for the life of her could not tell what to do. She had no idea how straw could be spun into gold, and she grew more and more miserable until at last she began to weep. But all at once the door opened, and in came a little man, and said, "Good evening, Mistress Miller. Why are you crying so?" "Alas," answered the girl, "I have to spin straw into gold, and I do not know how to do it." "What will you give me?" said the man again, "if I do it for you?" "My necklace," said the girl. The little man took the necklace, seated himself in front of the wheel, and 3 turns, and the reel was full. Then he put another on, and 3 times round, and the second was full too, and so it went on until the morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the reels were full of gold. By daybreak the king was already there, and when he saw the gold he was astonished and delighted, but his heart became only more greedy. He had the miller's daughter taken into another room full of straw, which was much larger, and commanded her to spin that also in one night if she valued your life. The girl knew not how to help herself, and was crying, when the door opened again, and the little man appeared and said, "What will you give me if I spin that straw into gold for you?" "The ring on my finger," answered the girl. The little man took the ring, again began to turn the wheel, and by morning had spun all the straw into glittering gold. The king rejoiced beyond measure at the sight, but still he had not gold enough, and he had the miller's daughter taken into a still larger room full of straw, and said, "You must spin this too in the course of this night, but if you succeed, you shall be my wife. Even if she be a miller's daughter," thought he, "I could not find a richer wife in the whole world." When the girl was alone, the mannikin came again for the 3rd time and said, "What will you give me if I spin the straw for you this time also?" "I have nothing left that I could give," answered the girl. "Then promise me if you should become queen, your first child." "Who knows whether that will ever happen?" thought the miller's daughter, and not knowing how else to help herself in this strait, she promised the mannikin what he wanted, and for that he once more span the straw into gold. And when the king came in the morning, messenger over the country to inquire far and wide for any other names that there might be. When the mannequin came the next day, she began with Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar, and said all the names she knew, one after another. But to everyone, the little man said, "That is not my name." On the second day, she had inquiries made in the neighborhood as to the names of the people there, and she repeated to the mannequin the most uncommon and curious. "Perhaps your name is Short Ribs, or Sheepshanks, or Laceleg." But he always answered, "That is not my name." On the third day, the messenger came back again and said, "I have not been able to find a single new name, but as I came to a high mountain at the end of the forest, where the fox and the hare bid each other good night, there I saw a little house, and before the house a fire was burning, and round about the fire quite a ridiculous little man was jumping. He hopped upon one leg and shouted, 'Today I bake, tomorrow brew, the next I'll have the young queen's child. Ah, glad am I that no one knew that Rumpelstiltskin I am styled.' You may think how glad the queen was when she heard the name, and when soon afterwards the little man came in and asked, 'Now, Mistress Queen, what is my name?' At first she said, 'Is your name Conrad?' He answered, 'No.' 'Is your name Harry?' He answered, 'No' again. 'Perhaps your name is Rumpelstiltskin.' 'The devil has told you that, the devil has told you that,' cried the little man, and in his anger he plunged his right foot so deep into the earth that his whole leg went in, and then in rage he pulled at his left leg so hard with both hands that he tore himself in two. And that's the end of that story. I'm going to look for one more short story, and then that'll be the end of this video. But I plan on making another one tomorrow of more stories from this collection. Again, this is Grimm's Fairy Tales. We'll go ahead and see if we can find another one. Alright, the story that I have selected is called The Elves. It looks like it's a couple pages long. A shoemaker, by no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but leather for one pair of shoes. So in the evening he cut out the shoes which he wished to begin to make the next morning, and as he had a good conscience, he lay down quietly in his bed, commended himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was just going to sit down to work, the two shoes stood quite finished on his table. He was astounded and knew not what to say to it. He took the shoes in his hands to observe them closer, and they were so neatly made that there was not one bad stitch in them, just as if they were intended as a masterpiece. Soon after, too, a buyer came in, and as the shoes pleased him so well, he paid more for them than was customary, and with the money, the shoemaker was able to purchase leather for 2 pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night, and next morning was was made, and so it went on constantly. What he cut out in the evening was finished by the morning, so that he soon had his honest independence again, and at last became a wealthy man. Now it befell that one evening, not long before Christmas, when the man had been cutting out, he said to his wife before going to bed, "What think you if we were to stay up tonight to see who it is that lends us this helping hand?" The woman liked the idea and lighted a candle, and then they hid themselves in a corner of the room behind some clothes which were hanging up there and watched. When it was midnight, two pretty little naked men came, sat down by the shoemaker's table, took all the work which was cut out before them, and began to stitch and sew and hammer so skillfully and so quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker could not turn away his eyes for astonishment. They did not stop until all was done, and stood finished on the table, and then they ran quickly away. Next morning the woman said, "The little men have made us rich, and we really must show them that we are grateful for it. They run about so, and have nothing on, and must be cold. I'll tell thee what I'll do. I will make them little shirts and coats, and vests and trousers, and knit both of them a pair of stockings, and do thou too make them 2 little pairs of shoes." The man said, "I shall be very glad to do it." And one night, when everything was ready, they laid their presents all together on the table instead of the cut-out work, and then concealed themselves to see how the little men would behave. At midnight they came bounding in, and wanted to get to work at once, but as they did not find any leather cut out, but only the pretty little articles of clothing, they were at first astonished, and then they showed intense delight. They dressed themselves with the greatest rapidity, putting the pretty clothes on, and singing, "Now we are boys so fine to see, why should we longer cobblers be?" Then they danced, and skipped, and leapt over chairs and benches. At last they danced out of doors. From that time forth they came no more, but as long as the shoemaker lived, all went well with him, and all his undertakings prospered. There was once a poor servant girl. This is part 2 of the story. There was once a poor servant girl who was industrious and cleanly, and swept the house every day, and emptied her sweepings on the great heap in front of the door. One morning, when she was just going back to her work, she found a letter on this heap, and as she could not read, she put her broom in the corner, and took the letter to her master and mistress, and behold, it was an invitation from the elves, who asked the girl to hold a child for them at its christening. The girl did not know what to do, but at length, after much persuasion, and as they told her that it was not right to refuse an invitation of this kind, she consented. Then 3 elves came and conducted her to a hollow mountain where the little folks lived. Everything there was small, but more elegant and beautiful than can be described. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony ornamented with pearls. The coverlids were embroidered with gold. The cradle was of ivory, the bath of gold. The girl stood as godmother, and then wanted to go home again, but the little elves urgently entreated her to stay 3 days with them. So she stayed, and passed the time in pleasure and gaiety, and the little folks did all they could to make her happy. At last she set out on her way home. Then first they filled her pockets quite full of money, and after that they led her out of the mountain again. When she got home, she wanted to begin her work, and she had not, as she thought, been 3 days, and she had not, as she thought, been 3 days with the little men in the mountains, but 7 years, and in the meantime, her former masters had died. And this is part 3. This is the last little paragraph in this story. A certain mother's child had been taken away out of its cradle by the elves, and a changeling with a large head and staring eyes, which would do nothing but eat and drink, laid in its place. In her trouble, she went to her neighbor and asked her advice. The neighbor said that she was to carry the changeling into the kitchen, set it down on the hearth, light a fire, and boil some water in 2 eggshells, which would make the changeling laugh, and if he laughed, all would be over with him. The woman did everything that her neighbor bade her. When she put the eggshells with water on the fire, the imp said, "I am as old now as the western forest, but never yet have I seen anyone boil anything in an eggshell." And he began to laugh at it. Whilst he was laughing, suddenly came a host of little elves who brought the right child, set it down on the hearth, and took the changeling away with them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I plan on doing daily, if not every other day, Let's Read ASMR series. And I hope this gave you tingles and helped you sleep or whatever it is that you're trying to relax or sleep or whatever it is. But until next time, ASMR Treasure